In recent years, tens of thousands of Uyghurs have fled persecution by the Chinese government in East Turkestan as refugees and asylum seekers. Many Uyghurs have been granted refuge in countries across the world where they are active and contributing members of society. However, they face a very difficult situation, cut off from their homeland, culture, family and friends. As of April 2017, many Uyghurs living outside East Turkestan lost all contact with their friends and loved ones and have not heard from them since. The Chinese crackdown on Uyghurs started in the 1990s when ethnic frictions flared amid calls for independence of the Uyghur people of Xinjiang province in China. Now, China's Muslim majority Xinjiang region, there have been reports of re-education camps where over 200,000 so-called suspects were held. The detainees of the re-education camps, roughly 10% of the entire Uyghur population in some regions, are reportedly forced to chant slogans, watch propaganda videos, denounce their religion and pledge loyalty to the Communist Party in overcrowded cells. There has long been repression of religious freedoms and reports of ongoing discrimination against the Uyghur people. But there are recent reports of a shift to mass detentions towards re-education camps, which was in fact a highlight of Chinese society at the advance of communism about 60-70 years ago. Seems to have resurfaced in East Turkestan with the so-called re-education of the Uyghur population. This evening we talk to Brother Zahid Khan, founder, documenting oppression against Muslims, live with us this evening from the UK. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Brother Zahid.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you for joining us on Radio Islam International. Tell us, Brother Zahid, I mean, we have heard of the Muslims of East Turkestan, the ethnic Uyghur population, but who are they? And in terms of the current boundaries of China, how long have they been part of Chinese society, and could they be regarded, in fact, as an independent nation?
First of all, Jazakallah khair for having me on to your program. First things first, I think it's important to redefine certain terminology and definitions of who the Uyghur people are and where they come from and what do they represent. First things first is the country itself is called East Turkestan, and it's been occupied since 1949 by the Chinese authorities. I mean, this is going on for the beginning of the 19th century. Even before that, they've been trying to get hold of occupying that land. But since 1949, they have been occupied, and the term Xinjiang was given to East Turkestan by the Chinese authorities officially in 1955. And the population of Uyghurs is about 20 million. I mean, there are other Turkish people out there as well, for example, like the other Kazakh Muslims and so forth. So they're in total, in that region of East Turkestan, the population of amounts to about 20 or 25 million people, because there's no clear data set or census by the Chinese authorities, and I think that's deliberately to give the impression that to the world that these people do not exist, really.
The current tensions, or the ongoing tension, should I say, between the Chinese Communist government and the Uyghur Muslims, I mean, have there been times that there has been a state of lull or a cooperation between both communities, or has this always been an issue that the Chinese communists, or should we say the majority Han Chinese communists, have found the Uyghur Muslims to be an obstacle in the form of a greater China?
There've always been conflict from the 50s, like you said, when they occupied that region. They've been ongoing since then, like revolutions by the Uyghur people, right back from the 1900s all the way up to this day. But as in from today, the Uyghur Muslims do not regard themselves as part of China. they see themselves as an independent nation. They have their own identity, they have their own culture, they have their own language, they have their own religion, and I think many Muslims Muslims have the misconception that there's no difference between a Chinese Muslim who's originally, Uyghur Muslim or a Uyghur Muslim. So we need to make that distinction that they're completely two different types of groups of Muslims. One in China who are Chinese Muslims, the Uyghur Muslims, while the Uyghur Muslims are from East Turkestan. They've been ongoing. The Chinese have always seen them an obstacle, and I think because of the natural resources that the region has in terms of gas, minerals, and so forth, and the biggest trade route into China, into Central Asia and all the way up even to Europe, they see that as basically it's a big money income generation for the Chinese government. So basically, they, from any revenue, any money that they raise from there, it's automatically going back into the Chinese government and never to the Uyghur Muslims.
Brother Zahid, the recent reports of internment camps, or what they might term as re-education camps, describe to us some of the atrocities and some of the stories coming out of these camps, that people who have managed to either flee or were somehow able to secure release for themselves, the harrowing stories and incidences that they report. Could you give us a brief description?
Yes, certainly. Over the past few years, the Uyghur Muslims who are out of the country, they say the number amounts to more than 1 million people, 1 million Uyghurs who are in these so-called political re-education camps. But it's nothing short of a Nazi camp, to be honest with you. The descriptions that they have is they do not even distinguish between the elderly, the children, the women. It's just straight brutality. As you can put it, and they have no mercy towards them. So, for example, there's a video being released from these camps where they're forced to chant praising the Chinese Jinping president. They're forced to praise him before they even give him food. So they have to, on a daily basis, do these is demoralizing in a way, where they're forced to hate themselves, forced to question their own belief, forced to denounce Islam and adopt basically what Chinese represent, and basically to be atheists or follow Chinese values. But it's nothing short of basically forced assimilation, we can say. But there's many incidents. For example, even our scholars from that region, for example, 82-year-old Sheikh Abdul Ahad Al Maktoum, he's recently basically, the news has come out recently where he passed away in Chinese police custody. He just couldn't hack what they were doing to him, but his death was reported 6 months ago, and only recently the Chinese officials gave his body after 6 months to his family. But he's been in prison throughout all his life. Even his own father, Sheikh Barat, he also died in Chinese custody in 1937. And there's another scholar who's famous as well. His name's Sheikh Muhammad Saleh Al-Kashkari from Kashgar city. He's basically renowned amongst the Uyghurs because he's the first person to translate the Quran into the Uyghur language, and his death has been confirmed beginning of this year in January, and he passed away also in Chinese police custody. So there's quite a number of reports now that are coming out now, where a lot, especially the elders, they're coming out of these so-called political re-education camps, and they're being the bodies are given to the families for burial. But now, from what they're trying to do now is they're trying to build a crematorium. Basically, they don't want the Uyghur Muslims to do Islamic rituals for janazah. So what they want to do is they want to cremate the bodies. So that's the level of detail that the Chinese authorities are willing to go into to basically to get rid of their Islamic identity, in essence.
How has these atrocities been acknowledged by the international community? And not just, of course, I'm referring to the Muslim media or the Muslim world, but the world in general. Have these stories made headlines, or have they become an issue of discussion in mainstream channels?
I mean, it's been picked up by the Human Rights Watch organization, and I've read a few articles by Amnesty International, but only from amongst that type of circle, there's really been. I mean, even in the UN, it's being brought up. In the US, I know it's also been brought up as well, but it's not really a pressing issue for some, because I don't know, for some reason, maybe it's the bilateral ties they have with the Chinese government or whatnot, but there's not really, to be honest, enough is mentioned about the plight of Uyghurs in East Turkestan. But many Uyghurs in the West are they're doing daily protests outside the embassy, Chinese embassy, for example, in The Hague, in the Netherlands, in America, outside the White House, and even in Turkey, they're doing demonstrations as well. But to be honest, it's not reaching on a state level, you can say. So the government can be pressured into doing something about it. But other than that, from the Muslim country's point of view, it's basically silence, unfortunately, especially in countries like Pakistan, and possibly even Malaysia, because there's a recent report that there are 11 refugees in Malaysia, and the Chinese government want them back. And that's the policy of the Chinese towards the Uyghurs. They always want the deportations of these Uyghurs back to China, so they can put them in jail, because they don't see Uyghurs that they're allowed to do these things. And so, for example, like Pakistan, because they very have strong relations, it's barely mentioned on there from that side of the world. But other than that, there's not really enough being said. For example, like with regards to Rohingya Muslims or Syria or Yemen, there's not enough being done about this issue.
Brother Zaid Akhtar, Jazakallah khairan for joining us and discussing such issues related to the Muslim world, and today's, of course, discussion regarding the Uyghur population. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for them, but your time and your availability to educate us on this matter, greatly appreciated, and Jazakallah khairan for joining us, Brother Zaid.
No problem. Wa iyyakum. And it's a pleasure to be on this podcast. Jazakallah khair.